Okay, we've got 12:30, so why don't we get started? Good afternoon, S&P. Good afternoon. Wow, that's a tremendous response. Okay, all right. My condolences for those of you who lost a friend over this weekend. I know it was a difficult moment for our campus, and I realize some of you have already had many classes, and maybe you've already talked about that, but we're going to try to get back on track today as best we can. But my condolences to you, and thank you to the many folks who came out last night to the very moving candlelight vigil. It was a very somber occasion, but also nice to see the community response when we've lost one of our own. So thank you for that. Okay, before we get into our conversation today, what I thought we'd do is just look at what's going to be due for Friday. That's going to be Friday the 4th, and we're going to do a TED Ed lesson, okay? So this is consistent with what's on the syllabus. Nothing is particularly new here, but I've signed into Blackboard, okay, and I've gone to the Documents section. And you can see that we had something that was due back on 8/31, and then we didn't have a TED Ed for today. We didn't have a PowerPoint for today, but we did have a bunch of questions to respond to for today regarding the consciousness chapter, and we'll be talking about those. But for Friday, what we ask you to do is sign on to this page, and you can click out to this TED Ed lesson. Okay, so on the very first day of class, we went upstairs and we established our TED Ed licenses or our emails and so forth. And so if you'll copy and paste that, okay. Unfortunately, those are not yet clickable, but you can just copy and paste that as I'll do now. I'll do a Control-C. I'll open up a new tab. I'll paste that in. And you'll see that there's a TED Ed lecture there, and this one is now going to be a video of me. I used to do this video or this lecture live for many, many years, and now I've pre-recorded all of my lectures, and I have the opportunity for you to watch the lecture by clicking on this. And when you're ready, you can click on Think. Okay, and the instructions are again in Blackboard, and I minimize myself over here, and you can see there are 15 questions. So you can click into this one, and you can begin to respond to your to the answer there, okay? And away you go. You make your way right on through here. As you're completing these, they come to me through TED Ed, and I get to see what your responses look like. So this is really neat, because just a few years ago, I would give this lecture live on that Friday. Now you've already seen the lecture before you come in, and you've answered some questions on it. So we can have, I think, a better conversation on that day. So we're getting ahead of the game, and I think it's good to distribute our practice in lots of ways. Just to make sure that we don't forget this, I'd like to introduce something new. We'll give it a try tonight and see if it works. I know some of you have already done the TED Ed bit. In the TED Ed lesson, I'm going to ask you to draw a graph or two. Okay? And if you're not able to use this technology tonight, that's okay. But over the course of a few TED Ed lessons, we'd like to be able to have you use this new technology called Draw2. How many people have used Draw2 before? Okay? All right, so I can see that we get some hands from my other class. I have another class with some of these students. Draw2 is a new website that I just learned about maybe a week before classes started, okay? So the idea is that if you put in draw.2, okay, and then you'll get a blank sheet like this, and you can pick up an imaginary or a virtual crayon, and you can make a pattern, or whatever you want to draw here, just scribble it all up, and then you can erase that by saying, I want to clear that, and you can draw all kinds of graphs. When you're ready to go, after you've drawn your graph, you can say, I want to share that, and as soon as you say share, you can then pick this up, okay, and I'll paste that in to a new URL over here, okay, and now anybody in the world can see your marvelous drawing, okay, right? Okay, so now when you're reading a TED Ed question, it might say something like, draw a graph that would make the point about signal detection theory, right? And then you would draw that up, just grab that simple URL or that web locator and paste that in as your response. And then when that comes to me, I can click on that and I can see what you drew, okay? So it's a little bit clunky, but these are not, it's not the best way of making graphs, but it's some way of me seeing how you're drawing rather than just typing. So most of the questions have just typed responses, but one or two of them have this draw to response. We'll see how we do. It's working fairly well in one of my other classes. Okay? And over a few tries, I'm sure this will become very second nature, but it's a little bit new to all of us. Madison has a question.
So there's not a reading to go with this kind of
Yeah. Yes, there is. Okay, so let me come back to that. So, and I want to keep all this clear because there's a lot going on here. Okay, so let's read this all the way through. Before 9 p.m. on Thursday, okay, so before 9 p.m. tomorrow night, please complete the TED Ed lesson at this website. That's the one that we just went to. So far, so good? Okay. To access the lesson, you can, you'll click on the Think section and then answer the 15 questions there. It may be helpful to print my lecture notes. Okay, so when you see me on the video, I'm standing in front of a screen like this, and I'm going through this PowerPoint. Okay, so it might help you to print that PowerPoint beforehand, so you can make notes along the way. Okay, and it might also help you to look at reading number 3 in our course pack. They're all the same thing. They're all about signal detection theory. Okay, there's a lot to do there. What I would really like you to focus on is answering the TED Ed questions. Okay. Right, that's your main thing. If you need to dial back and look into the readings, please feel free to do that. But if you're short on time, let this one go for last and do the TED Ed first always. Okay? And then these are kind of like supplementary readings, and you might find that they are helpful. You might find that you really don't need them. But anyway, those are there for you. And there are times when we will be just doing a reading all by itself without also doing a TED Ed lesson. But if we have a TED Ed, we'll make that top priority. Okay? So that's the main driver. It might help you answering those questions by clicking on the PowerPoint notes that I'm lecturing on in my video. Okay, so you have the same notes that I've got. And then if you wanted more information than that, maybe Course Pack 3 will help you there. Okay? All of that is listed on the syllabus for that day, which is 9/4. Okay? Who's okay with that? That's actually a lot. It's probably different than what you've done in other classes. And these first couple of days of class, it might seem a little rough because we're not sure exactly how to do this TED Ed thing, but after we do a few of them, I think we'll get the hang of it. Okay? Great. Okay. Okay, really good. So, let's now go back over to this. Okay? What I'd like to do is spend most of the day having some conversation on the consciousness chapter, which I absolutely love. It's by Dr. Nick Lane, who is a biochemist. He's a biochemist who is trained either at Cambridge or Oxford, and he has a terrific speaking voice. I actually have this on audiobook, and he's just a wonderful speaker in addition to being a wonderful writer. And there are lots and lots of questions here. I've done this for 2 or 3 semesters now, and I find that we rarely make it all the way through all the questions because there are so many of them here, but we'll pick a couple of the ones that we think are most important and go that way. I'd like to focus on page 1 for the moment, and maybe we'll call your attention to a couple of the questions here. But what I'd like to do before we do that is we'll put you into small pairs so that you can discuss your answers with a partner and get some ideas out, and then we'll see if we can share those with the wider group. We'll just move you around a little bit, okay? So I realize people are maybe sitting next to somebody that they're going to wind up being partnered with, but I'd like to do it this way. Why don't I take these 2 folks and make them a pair? So, and they may or may not know each other. So Melanie and Sarah, can you please raise your hands, okay? And if you 2 can move next to each other, you're a pair, okay? And we've got Zach and Abby. You might have been a pair anyway. Excuse me, okay? Sibel and Madison, okay? Hands real high so you can see each other, okay? Meg and Sarah, okay? They seem to know each other. Tawny and Jess. Tawny and Jess, that is. Okay, okay, Tawny and Jess. And then Alexa and Jacob, that's our next pair. Okay, I think they found each other. Claudio and Claire, they found each other. Okay, that looks good. And then it looks like we have a trio. Can we get Alex, Gabby, and Liz all in one trio? And if you need to move, fill out the room as best you can. And we'll let you get into position, and then I'll assign different folks different questions, okay? So move to where you and your partner can comfortably be. Some of you are in a triad. Alex, Gabby, and Liz are in a triad. Feel free to use all portions of the room.
I didn't get a chance to do the reading.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. I'll make an announcement about that, okay? Okay. Okay. So find your partners, take a moment, make yourselves comfortable. Okay, now that you're in position, if I can have your attention. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a subset of the questions, and we'll figure out what subset it is. Right now, we're going to focus just on page 1, okay, and I'll tell you which particular questions in a moment. With this caveat, I received numerous emails from students in this room right now. I teach other classes, and a lot of students were very troubled by the events of yesterday, very understandably so. Some people were not able to do the readings, and that's okay. You know, I've been here 15 years. We've had only a small handful of tragedies over these 15 years, and this happens to be one of those days. So if you didn't get to do the reading, you shouldn't feel bad about that. I'm glad that you're here. A few folks might not be with us in the room today because they're just too distraught, and that's true in some of my other classes as well. So what I'll say is just make the best of this as you can, and if you don't have an answer to the question, that's okay today. What I would like to do is have some of us focus on question number 1. Okay, so can we do it this way? Can we have this group and this group and that group focus on question 1? Okay. Can we have that group, and that group focus on question number 3? Okay. And then everybody else focus on question number 5. We'll give you a couple of minutes to talk through those, okay, with your partner, and then we'll share, okay, and we'll see how we're doing on time, and then we'll move on to page 2. Go ahead, mix it up. So I don't know if you have anything on you to read or not.
I have, I promise.
Oh, okay, that's helpful. Yeah. And it's okay if you don't get a solid answer. All right? All right, sure.
Definitely getting the brightness material. We had remind new material. So like it's having material.
Yeah, I think.
So they know each other. I thought that they told each other.
Natural selection is just like
Can we do one more minute? One more minute?
He was also really nervous about publishing these.
High levels of consciousness would be awareness regarding
genetics,
lower levels would be
Okay, Okay, why don't we draw the line there? Sorry to cut you off. Tried to keep it to just one question per group so that you might make some progress on it. But we have a lot of questions to go through, and we'll see if these questions work out for us. We might want to go with a different subset, but why don't we start out with number one? Maybe somebody from over on this side can help us out with this. And it reads that we've got it projected up here. Stephen Jay Gould posited that science and religion are non-overlapping magisteria. This idea is sometimes referred to as NOMA, that's non-overlapping magisteria. Do you agree that science and religion are non-overlapping domains? Explain your response. Any conversation? I think this side was on question one. Alex has something?
So we came to the conclusion that we disagree. Because at the center between both religion and science is humans. And on top of that, they kind of build each other. They're rivals to an extent.
Okay.
But certainly they drive each other. Whereas science fills in gaps in our knowledge, there are still things that cannot be explained. And so we have religion to explain it.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Very good. Some others. So you didn't see them as non-overlapping, right? They do overlap. They occasionally will be talking about similar things, maybe the origins of the universe or origins of life or something along those lines. Okay? Other comments on number one, non-overlapping magisteria? Stephen Jay Gould's idea of NOMA. An interesting notion. Okay, just in the interest of time, why don't we move ahead? I think I said our next one was number 3, and so I'll dial down to that one and read it to us, and maybe somebody in the center of the room can help us out with this. So this question reads as follows. The author addresses the challenge of defining consciousness. Where does the author stand on the issue of whether consciousness is dichotomous, that's to say all or none, or instead exists along a spectrum? And do you agree or disagree? Can somebody in the center here, Tawny's got something. Okay, he's interested in the spectrum of consciousness. Very nicely stated. Very nicely stated. And along the way, you mentioned, you alluded to the next bit, extended consciousness versus primary or core consciousness. I didn't ask you to warm up on that. Does anybody recall what that distinction was, at least roughly? Primary or core consciousness versus extended consciousness? We'll go with Abby, yeah.
Oh, like extended consciousness is like how you like see and understand the world around you.
Okay.
Like core consciousness is like your emotional.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Did you want to add to that? I thought you had your hand up. Maybe you did. Okay.
I was just going to say that it's more the primary consciousness is more of the primal urges and what drive just instinctual.
Okay. Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, so in this primary or core, we might imagine that these are evolutionarily older, and there's a very strong evolutionary take in this particular chapter. And you can imagine this is such things as thirst and hunger, but even simple responses to lights and sounds and so forth. Lots of animals of all varieties can do that. Then we have ideas about autobiographical memories. You know, what were you doing in the beginning of this summer? What were you doing last summer? That kind of a thing. That's more extended in time. You might extend to thinking about other people's thinking. You know, when we're even in the current tragedy that we just had, we're thinking about the emotions of others. It's hard to know whether other animals have that capacity or the senses in which other animals have that capacity. But the other animals would probably have these core level sensations and desires for food or water and so forth. Okay, so we probably have something akin to a spectrum. Okay, and then we had a question number 5, and in your own words, can somebody describe David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness? Maybe somebody on this side of the room was able to pick up on Chalmers' hard problem. Chalmers, by the way, is a philosopher, right? Yes, Sibel's got something.
Consciousness and feelings are connected, and we don't know how consciousness or feelings kind of work. So we can't program that into other things, like robots, and therefore consciousness is going to live.
Okay, yes. So we don't know how to put consciousness into robots. That's an important point about that. There's some link, right, between this neural activity and consciousness, but we're not sure how to put those together. And one of the ways of thinking about hard problem of consciousness might be summarized the following way. We can say, how do we go from neurons firing to a feeling? Right, so these are my stuffed animal neurons. Okay, here's one, here's another. They're going to make a synapse. Right? How do we go from firing to a feeling? We learned a little bit in Intro to Psych about the flow of different kinds of ions, and we have maybe minus 70 millivolts or minus 44 millivolts, and we're getting all kinds of action potentials. We can describe all that biochemically, but on some level, I look around the room and I see some shades of almost orange, and I see something black over there, and I hear this background noise and so forth. How do we go from neurons firing to the sensations that we've got that make up maybe at least core consciousness, and then some other kind of neural activity is going to give rise to more extended consciousnesses. So our capacity to think about other folks or to think about ourselves long term. Okay, all of that is driven only by, on some level, ions moving back and forth. How do we go from a firing to a feeling? Okay, those seem so qualitatively different. How do we go from firing to a feeling is the hard problem of consciousness. How do we link those, as Sibel was talking about? And we can sometimes program a function into a computer, but we can't program the feeling into a computer. Right? Okay. Are there other ideas about that? Okay, thank you all. Real good. Okay, why don't we go on to page 2, in the interest of time, and we'll do maybe one other think, pair, share. I would like to do one other demo, too, after we do one more think, pair, share, and then maybe we'll do a third think, pair, share. But why don't we do it this way? Can we have this side, folks over here, can you work on question number 7, please? Okay. Folks who were in the center a moment ago, can you please work on question number 12? You can circle that one. And folks who are over on this side, can you work on question number 13? I've done this for a couple of semesters, and those were the ones that the students seemed to like the most. So we'll hit the highlights this time around. Okay? That was 7, 12, and 13. We'll give you a moment to mix it up, and then we'll come back in 2 or 3 minutes.
According to that
Like you can understand that this process go together.
Understand vision. Some sort of disregard is
I'm going to do one more minute. Okay, why don't we see if we can come back together and see what you and your partner talked about. So I think we're over on this side, and we're up to question number 7. Do you think that the philosopher Daniel Dennett was guilty of this particular kind of rhetorical act called begging the question when he rhetorically asked, why shouldn't neurons firing feel of something? Why not indeed? And here's a note that frequently in everyday usage we use the word beg the question somewhat incorrectly. When we say somebody's raising the question, we sometimes say, oh, they're begging the question or raising the question. Here, it's really a matter of the logical error of having some circular reasoning, giving a response that's not really a response, okay? Evading our explanatory responsibility. So he's saying that to solve the problem that we just mentioned a moment ago, this idea of going from a firing to a feeling, right, this hard problem of consciousness, he said, well, maybe it's really not a problem at all. Maybe that's what it's supposed to be, that we should have neurons firing, and that's all you would need to have a feeling, right? Why shouldn't neurons firing feel of something, like maybe the color red or a sound, okay? So the question for you is, do you think he's begging the question here? Do you think he's evading explanatory responsibility? Or maybe he's correct? So I think we're over on this side. Did you have any conversation about that? Good, yeah.
I guess we said that it is somewhat of a cop-out answer.
Okay.
Just because, I mean, he is avoiding the explanation.
Okay.
Just like rephrasing the question. That's kind of where we're at.
Okay, he's simply rephrasing it.
Yeah,
right.
And there's really no, we have all this physical evidence about chemicals and neurons firing that gives you the emotion, and it's still not really touching on that why we get
yeah, how do you get from A to B? Yeah.
Of love from that chemical balance or something.
Yeah, right.
So,
it's a good point. They seem so qualitatively different from each other, right? You've got this flow of ions over on this side, and then you have these intense feelings of whatever, intense feelings of joy or of love or of anger or hatred or poignancy, whatever the case might be. How do you get from one of those to the other? Something that is not in the readings, to my recollection, but it was in another one of the readings that we had in a different semester. There's a fellow by the name of Gerald Edelman, who very recently passed away, but he was a Nobel laureate, and he had an answer to all of this. He had a way of addressing the hard question, okay? And it's quite interesting, I think, to come to his mantra. And I'll ask you to repeat the mantra with me. His response on this is that, and here it goes, an explosion does not resemble an explosive. An explosion does not resemble an explosive. Can we all say that together first? An explosion does not resemble an explosive. Okay? So he offers that when he's asked the question about hard consciousness, the hard question of consciousness. How do we go from firing to a feeling? They seem so qualitatively different. They don't look like each other. And you're telling me that this thing causes this thing. Right? How do we get there? And Edelman, the Nobel laureate, replies, well, an explosion doesn't resemble an explosive. Somebody want to put that together for us? What's he getting at with that? Yeah, nice.
Is the explosive the potential to be an explosion, but it's not the actual explosion? It's
okay.
It kind of, I don't know if this is correct, but it reminds me of the, it's like I don't remember the physics law where it's like you have the potential, like
okay.
It's right before you go down like an incline, you have that potential.
You have potential energy, okay.
And then it goes into like kinetic energy
okay.
as you go down, but you haven't moved yet, so it's not the same thing.
Okay, so they're not the same thing, and one might be preceding the other, okay. Something else, an explosion does not resemble an explosive. This is Edelman's answer to the hard problem of consciousness. Yes, Claire's got something.
Like if you were going to look at a stick of dynamite, per se, and then see what it might have caused, like a rock slide or something, like it's totally different. If you took that to a person that had never seen an explosive before and then said, are these two connected?
Right.
They would find absolutely no connection there whatsoever. And so I think that's kind of what he's getting at.
Yeah.
this physical similarity, but then you can't really find a connection between them.
That's right, that's right. So to pick up on Claire's example, you can have a stick of dynamite, and that might create some kind of an avalanche, or it might open up some portion of the Earth that we want to create a tunnel through or something like that. As you see this Earth exploding, right, it doesn't look at all like the stick of dynamite. One way of thinking about this might be the following, and that is that it wouldn't have to be the case that an effect resembles physically its cause. Right? The cause could have one physicality, and its effect could have a different physicality. We can look around our beautiful campus, and we can see these nicely constructed buildings. In comes a tornado, hypothetically, and it wipes the buildings out and knocks them down. Okay? But when the buildings are knocked down, they would not physically look like the tornado. Right? The tornado is this funnel-shaped thing. Okay? Right? The cause, the tornado, doesn't physically resemble the effect. Right? The broken buildings. Right? And in Claire's case, the stick of dynamite doesn't physically represent or physically look like the landslide that it might be creating. An explosion, like this mushroom cloud, doesn't actually look like the atom bomb itself that gave rise to that mushroom cloud. Very often it's the case that the cause does not physically look like the effect. So why should ions moving through neuronal channels, that's one physicality, why should we expect that bears a physical resemblance to consciousness? Right? In other words, it's getting at maybe we're making a false assumption that the cause and the effect have to be physically similar to each other, and maybe they don't. Okay? An explosion does not resemble an explosive. Who's okay with that? Okay? Maybe you don't agree, but that's Edelman's answer. Okay? Okay. Very good. Why don't we go on down to the next one, and then we'll move right on to, I think that was number 12. Was that what we had in the center? Were people working on this one? I'm interested in your opinion on the author's following statements. Vision is more complex than it seems. But we can gain no sense of this complexity through introspection by thinking about how we see. Our conscious minds have no access to the neural mechanisms which underscore vision. Any conversation that we had, that's a tough one, I think. Anybody in the center here have a comment on that one? Okay, thanks.
We weren't
Zach.
sure if we were quite getting what he was saying, but we thought that if you just look at the way you see things and then expect to understand vision through that, well, you can't, because the way we see things is not exactly how it's being, how the processes are working in our brain. But we kind of disagreed with his statement, because I think if you do trace back the steps from the actual neurons themselves, you can sort of understand the neural mechanism, but it's not from what you're seeing, it's from tracing back the steps.
It's from tracing back the steps, and in tracing back the steps we might use some modern technology. We might use something like MRI to do that. We might use EEGs to do that, right? But if you imagine that you're somebody like Aristotle and you're trying to think about how vision actually works, you could think all day, right? But you would never necessarily know that you had a thalamus, right, that was mediating your thinking, or mediating your vision while you were thinking about this, right? I mean, how would you know that you had a thalamus? You actually have to take apart some other brain, like maybe the brain of an animal, and look at that structure in what is now a dead animal, and try to figure out, what might that do, right? But just to sit and think about it, we probably don't have any kind of access to that, right? We don't directly have access to the number of action potentials that are going on in a particular part of your brain at any given moment. Toward the end of this chapter, and we might not have time to get to this particular question, there's a wonderful statement by a philosopher and neuroscientist, Jose Musacchio, and he basically says that we are shut out of our neuronal workings for our own good. You don't really need to know, in an evolutionary sense, that it's your occipital lobe that's giving you vision, and it's your temporal lobe that's giving you hearing, right? What you need to know is that tiger's coming to get me, and I need to get out of Dodge, okay, right? If you can imagine that you had a counterpart way, way back who somehow had access to his or her occipital lobe, right, and said, hey, look, my occipital lobe is active, and I think level or layer 5 or layer 6 is now more active. Meanwhile, that tiger is closing in on you, okay? What you really need to know is what's going on in your environment. Your brain needs to mediate that. But as an organism, you don't need to know necessarily what's going on in the thalamus or the hypothalamus at any given instant. You need to know what is ecologically relevant. How do I escape from this? How do I pursue food? How do I pursue a partner? Right? Those are the kinds of things, the tasks that you'd have to get to evolutionarily. To sit and muse about which particular ensemble of neurons is firing. I wonder what the millivolt state is. I'm fascinated by that. You might be fascinated by that, but you actually don't have to have that in order to survive. Sharks probably don't know what's going on inside of their own brains. Sharks have been around for several 100 million years. Okay? They're doing just fine. Okay? They have no clue about what might be happening in any particular brain structure. Okay? They don't need to know. Right? So maybe that would have been a waste of neural energy, right, and metabolism to be able to look inside of your own brain, so to speak, and pull that out. Okay, let's get to number 13. I think that's over on that side. And we'll ask how people grappled with this question. Briefly explain Wolfsinger's neural synchrony, and also be able to explain why it's important given Hubel and Wiesel's Nobel-winning work. So there's a lot going on there. Anybody want to take a shot at that? Okay, thank you, Melanie.
Okay, so what I'm getting is that like neural synchrony is basically the idea that like neurons that fire together wire together, basically, that large groups of neurons sort of become synchronized to like a specific type of pattern.
Okay.
And in Hubel and Wiesel's experiment, they anesthetized cats and put an electrode in their brain.
Okay.
And tried to like they took a stimulus and tried to like move it different directions and like put it in different locations and see like when the neuron fired.
Okay.
It was like a little popping sound
Sure.
video that we saw.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think that's just kind of like a real like demonstration of sort of this idea that if like a specific stimulus is like presented a certain way or in like a certain pattern, like certain neurons will fire whereas others won't.
Okay, very, very good. Yeah, very nicely explained. And there is this idea that we have a broad distribution of neurons across the brain, and some of them are specialized for certain kinds of tasks. Some of them might be picking up color, for example. Others might be picking up what I would call orientation. So at this moment, this blue magic marker is vertical, and now it's horizontal. Okay, so we have blueness, that's a color, and we have orientation. And in these two cases, I'm using vertical and horizontal. Okay, now you could have a neuron that is the blue vertical marker neuron, but then you need another one over here. Right? Think about all the objects you could possibly see. It would be this vast number that would exceed the number of neurons you have in your brain. What we need to do somehow is have neurons pair up with each other. Some of them are going to specialize in blueness, some in redness, some in yellowness. Others are going to specialize in this orientation and not that orientation, and vice versa. And they need to be able to handshake or talk to each other. Moment by moment, as I'm moving around, I'm creating new images on your retina. As I'm flapping my vocal cords, I'm creating new patterns of pressure on your tympanic membranes and so forth. All of that has to be somehow captured by your neurons, and they're going to be tuned to different kinds of properties. And when they fire synchronously, then we get the idea that, in that particular location of space, there's both blueness and verticality. In some other location of space, there's a black-white border and horizontality. Right? Okay? That kind of thing. So what I would like to do to see if we can get to this idea of neural synchrony is we'll turn you into neurons for a moment. We'll pretend that we have a small ensemble of neurons, and some of you are tuned to color. That is, you fire action potentials when you see your favorite color. Others of you are tuned to orientations, and we'll have some of you be the vertical orientation neurons, and we'll have some of you be the horizontal orientation neurons. Okay? And we'll see how this might all come together. Okay, so let's do this. Let's make some of the folks, how about the three of you? Can you be the red neurons? That's as red as I could find. That's kind of orangey, but you're going to be the red neurons. Can I make the three of you be the green neurons? And maybe I can have the three of you be blue neurons. Okay? All right. And then this row right here, can you be the vertical people? So when you see something vertical, you're going to give us some action potentials. And the folks over on this side, can you be the horizontal folks? Okay? So I'm going to put up a stimulus, and we're going to see if we can get some synchronized neural firing. What we'll do first is we'll have some background level of neural activity. And the way that we signify neural activity in this class is by doing this with our hands. Can we all go like that? Okay? There's a little bit of a glug, glug, glug. Okay? This is a spontaneous rate of firing that doesn't really signify anything. But when you see a stimulus that is your stimulus, maybe it's the right color, maybe it's the right orientation, you go like this, okay? You start firing, as Melanie was telling us. Yeah, you're really, really firing away, okay? So you're all tuned to a particular region of space, and then all of a sudden, this thing happens, okay? Now my blue neuron should be going crazy, and at the same time, notice if you look around, the blues are going crazy. We're not getting much out of the reds and out of the greens. The blues are going nuts, and the horizontals are spazzing out over there, right? And then I go like this, Okay, and now we keep the blueness, but now the vertical neurons are firing, and they go like this. So these two features are synchronized, right? And when I go like this, a different pattern is synchronized. And if I go like this, we now get a different pattern. If I go like that, we get a different pattern. And if I go like this, okay, and then that, okay, and then this, and then that, okay, right? So now we can have different populations of neurons synchronizing with each other, and even at different rhythms. You can imagine that some of them can synchronize at, if you will, if you know a little bit about music, maybe they're synchronizing, if you will, in eighth notes, and some other ensembles are synchronizing in quarter notes and so forth. So now we have this this symphony, so to speak, metaphorically, of neural synchrony, and you are the music while the music lasts, is a theme he keeps coming back to, right? So as something else moves in and out of your consciousness, you get different ensembles that are synchronizing, and away they go. They're going to synchronize up with somebody else momentarily, and then they're all done. Okay? That's our little demo on synchronized neural firing. Okay. In the interest of time, why don't we go ahead and we'll have one more pair and share. Okay. I'll move us down to page 3. And before we do that, we'll just see if anybody had a question on neural synchrony. That makes sense? It's a really handy way to solve an infinity problem. Right? There's almost infinitely many things we can see out here. And although we have billions of neurons, we don't have trillions, and we don't have infinitely many neurons. But if you can mix and match, okay, you can cover a lot of ground. We only have 26 letters in the English alphabet, but look how many pages we can write. Look how many ideas we can express. If you can mix and match those letters in particular combinations, you can get off to infinity. Right? We can express infinitely many numbers. We have something like 10 symbols for numbers, 0 through 9. Okay? We can mix and match them in particular ways. We can get to infinity with a limited number of components. So it's pretty powerful, this idea of neural handshaking. I think it's really a wonderful idea. And there's a fair amount of evidence for it. Okay, so we're on page 3, and I wonder if we can have, let's start over here with this group. Can we have you go to question number 19 over on this side? Folks in the center, can you do question number 21? And then folks on this side, then we have you go over to page 4, and let's see, let's do number 27 over on this side. Okay? Question number 27. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to put this together, and then we'll wrap up with those 3 questions.
Oh, okay.
Let's do one more minute.
Like what they are?
That's what I gather on because I was saying that they already look like that. It says consciousness epiphenomenon, phenomenon. Okay, you're not sure of I need to know that. Okay. That do exert effects. I was like looking it up on my like online.
Okay, why don't we come on back and see what people have come to. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left, I believe. So why don't we go to question number 19? Is that what the folks over here are working on? Is that the one that you had? So let me dial it down and we can all see question 19. Okay. So describe Singer's so-called neural handshaking, and why is it believed that slower oscillations are critical to connecting core consciousness with extended consciousness? Anybody want to tackle that one? There's a lot going on there. Okay, thanks, Claire.
Essentially, neural handshaking is basically when a group of neurons is over here and they want to go talk to another group of neurons over here. So in between repolarizing, the neurons are able to come in and then connect and make, or like pick up the signal.
Okay. Okay, right.
And then that signal will be like, it won't be picked up if the neuron is repolarizing in that instance, and so the speed of oscillations has a big part to do with that, and how and what will be picked up when, I guess. Yeah,
right. Okay, very good. Anybody want to build on that? We've had a few folks looking on that. Yes, thanks.
Well, also as important is the kind of information that's being transferred, and I understood it as like sensory inputs being put into like memory and language, so into a way that we can understand it. So kind of going from like the unaware to our consciousness.
Okay.
And that's also why the slower oscillations were important, because that allowed things to enter the consciousness. So there's more of a simultaneous overlap.
Okay. Okay, real good. So a lot of ideas are coming together here. You probably remember from intro to psych that we have this graphic we draw about there's some excitation and then we have a refractory period and there's excitation again, right? So there's something that is roughly cyclical. It might not be a perfect sine wave. I'm going to draw something like a sine wave here, and I'll draw a really long sine wave. This is a very slow oscillation. This is the passage of time. At this moment, the entity is in the on state, and over here is in the off state. So this is a relatively slow oscillation, okay? And then there might be a group of neurons that are firing like that together. They're all synchronized at that particular half-note pace, so to speak, relatively slow pace. And then there might be another group of neurons that are picking up maybe sound information as opposed to, say, sight information. And maybe they're also going to be firing together, but not directly with the visual neurons, but rather they've got their own pace, and yet on some level, they both start and end at the same time as the visual neurons, right? So what's going on here is this slow one is kind of like quarter notes, okay, and this faster one is kind of like eighth notes. So here you've got a population that might be doing something like hearing. This population might be doing something like vision, and they, even though they're different neuronal sets, they're synchronizing in a way that maybe all these smaller ones are in this larger envelope, and that larger envelope has some kind of conscious meaning for us. We understand it to be an approaching object, or we understand it to be the possibility of rain 3 days from now that's going to ruin our parade, okay, something along these lines, okay? But that's the idea that we have different cycling rates, and it might be that we have different ensembles of neurons that might even be moving at their own rhythm, but they're synchronizing in some way. So neural handshaking, neural synchrony, and this very unhelpful phrase called parallel reentrant signals. All of those mean the same thing. We have some kind of synchronization in a neural firing. 3 different authors have used 3 different vocabulary terms for that. Okay, we've got time for just one more, I think. So let's see what our last question was. Why don't we end with that last one? At bottom, consciousness is about life and death. Some folks over here want to help us out with whether they agreed with that or not? Consciousness is about life and death. Okay, thanks.
I actually kind of disagreed. We were just thinking of like simpler organisms like a single-cell bacteria or like a tree. We would still consider that alive even though it doesn't have a consciousness. We would say, yeah, it's like life.
Okay.
So we're not sure.
Okay.
That's where he was going with that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Does it, to what extent can a single-cell organism have an experience like a light or a sound, and yet somehow these things are still alive? They're self-replicating anyway, right? Okay, all right. So maybe he's gone too far. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I guess we're just coming down to how you define life or what's the definition of being alive.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And by the way, he starts out this book with how life might have originated on Earth. But so he's got a theme here, and we just tuned into chapter 10. Okay, I'm sorry that I skipped over one group, but we're out of time. We're at 1:20, and I like to start promptly, and I like to end 20, so you can get to your next class. So thank you for a fantastic conversation. I'll see some of you in the room next door in just a few minutes. And just as a reminder, as you're going out, you'll click into the document section of Blackboard, and you'll copy and paste that TED Ed lesson. You can use these other resources as they're helpful to you, but we're looking for your 15 answers here. Okay? We'll be talking about signal detection theory on Friday. Have a great day. Yes?
I know that I will be out of town September 24th.
Okay.
It's just the concept that we have this class.
Okay.
So that kind of works out. Is there anything that would you like me to send you an email?
If you can remind me, because I probably won't remember, but if you can just say, here's a heads up that I'm going to be out, that'll be fine.
Okay.
I'm sure it'll be fine. Okay? Sure.